melt is when I'm ocean waves.
Yeah. Today on Nova Legends podcast, I had the great Matthew Hatfield from Virginia Preps, ESPN Radio. We're going to preview the 2022-2023 basketball season. Matthew, thanks for joining me.
Al- Always a pleasure, Julian. Happy holidays and a happy new year to you and your viewers.
Yeah, you too, Matt. I know you're probably traveling around with ODU. Well, you did real well in your football picks, but unfortunately, there was lots of chalk. So any of the bettors out there probably didn't make a whole lot of money on your picks. But basketball is a new opportunity for you. When I played basketball in many years ago, it was hard to evaluate the different parts of the state until the tournament. But this year, since we're already 6-7 games in or so, we've already seen a lot of the cross-state matchups already. Highland Springs came up to I think the Patriot. Western Branch came up to, I think they came up to Patriot as well. I think Thomas Dale has been up to Potomac. Hayfield has been down to Woodgrove. Oh no, Stuffman Walsh's team.
Woodside, yeah.
Woodside. So I think Hampton last night beat on the girls' side, beat Edison. So we probably have a pretty good idea what's going on in basketball so far.
Yeah, I think because there's so many showcases where you have these out of district matchups, Julian, which you don't get as many of the opportunities in football, you get a chance to have that gauge or barometer. Now, I will also say because there are so many games, it's harder to go undefeated or harder to stay spotless, if you will. We see that quite frequently with football teams. I think every team that was in the state championship this past year was undefeated that won it, except Riverheads, who's won, 7 in a row. In basketball, I marvel at what Hayfield's doing right now. 39 straight wins as we speak today. A couple of wins in the Governor's Challenge. They did win that event against Woodside at Princess Anne, their showcase event, and they take on all challengers and all comers, which you have to respect and certainly tip the hat to Carlos Poindexter for doing that. And they have some new faces to augment the standard players that we've seen the last couple of years, like Greg Jones, who's going to American, and David King, who's got that old man, old fashioned game. He's just the ultimate glue guy for them inside. He's got the goggles. He doesn't look like an imposing factor, but he's just so good with his footwork down low. And then DJ Holloway, who's terrific in the open court, such a stellar defender for them. But they've really implemented those new pieces well, like John Awoke, like Donovan Bass Briscoe with that game winner against Patriot, and some others that have gotten in the fold for them too. So I like what they're doing. They're going to be hard to beat in Class 6, even though Patriots had a couple of close losses by a whisker or two. Sherman Rivers has built a very nice program there. Nasir Coleman's one of the best point guards around. Isaiah Vicks blossoming as one of the better front court players who can get it done at both ends, blocking shots, starting to score more on the basket, rebound too. They have a lot of good parts as well, so they could be headed for a collision course. But I'd also caution South County's very deep. They're playing right now in the George Long Holiday Tournament. Tony Bentley and company run at Wakefield. And I think they're in a championship game, if I'm not mistaken, against Washington Liberty, who, by the way, is coming down to our Virginia Preps Classic, Bobby Dobson's team with a very good point guard in James McIntyre. Yeah, they're coming down, as is W.T. Woodson, Doug Craig's Cavaliers. It's going to be our 14th annual, by the way, at Virginia Wesleyan in early February. So it's just a chance for all these different teams, whether you're from Northern Virginia, Richmond, Tyler, to get out and get seen. And I think some early storylines have developed. We've got Hayfield in this magical run again. So how long can this streak go? I mean, it's going to be hard to be a state streak of 80, 90 wins in a row, but still, it's impressive what they're doing. Class 5 to me is very deep as it is every year. Just give you an example of how unsure I am on who wins Class 5. Last year, Highland Springs won a state championship. They were not in our preseason top 10. I started them out third or fourth this year. I just watched them, by the way, in the Allen Iverson showcase at Bethel lose a close game to Norview. They took the lead late in that game after falling behind 20-3, but missed some free throws that cost them late. They got a very explosive junior in Danzel Coles, who scored about 30 in the state championship game in their win over Maury last March at VCU. But still getting some football players back. I put them number 1 in last week's poll, moved them up. They lost 3 games to that. 3 games. So they've fallen out of the top 10. So literally, I'm telling you right now, they can still win the state championship, or they could go lose in the first, second round of the playoffs. Class 5 is so deep. Right now, I'm looking at Menchville very hard. They beat Woodside in a close game. Lamont Struthers has a really good program led by Etienne Struthers, his son, who's going to Appalachian State. A.J. Clark, who's headed to VMI. They've got length. They've got guard play. Woodside's still going to be in the mix. Maury can defend. Norview's dangerous. some teams in Tidewater. That Region 5B is a gauntlet, but 5 is wide open. It's always one of the deepest, more interesting classes in the state for basketball. Class 4 looks like a collision
Hey,
course
Matt,
again, potentially.
before we get to four,
Yeah,
Matthew, let me stop you real quick. Let's go back to
yeah.
6 real quickly. I just want to talk about Battlefield. Now,
Oh,
Battlefield got to the state final last year. They
thank you. I'm
finally were
glad you
able
did.
to turn the
Yep.
tables against Patriot. They're playing in the final at Lake Braddock today. They should be huge
Yep.
favorites. I think to beat Briarwoods in the final there, and they're on a collision course with a matchup with Patriot in the first
Yes.
game of districts that's coming up in a couple weeks.
I'm glad you stopped me with Battlefield because I watched some of their game yesterday while our ODU team was at practice against Stonebridge online. It was on the stream they had. And Randall Bills is doing a super job there. He's got 2 players that scored 20 plus in Maddox Tennant and Ryan Darian. They don't have any superstar names. They have some really solid players that fit their system, and they run their stuff so well. And they're going to be, I think they're like 11-0 now, have a chance to be 12-0. And they're doing it quietly because everybody's paying so much attention to what Hayfield's doing, to what Patriots doing. South County's on the come up. I think Mike Robinson's going to have another state championship again before it's all said and done here in a few years at South County with the young talent he's got there in the fold. And then there's some other programs I'm probably leaving out, like Manchester, Richmond, who's quietly 9-0, James River and Midlothian is very, very good. Oscar Smith out of Tidewater here in Chesapeake. They're one of the better teams around, and they've got the talent with Kareem Stagg, a sophomore big man. So Class 6 has got a lot of people that you have to pay attention to. But Battlefield's probably the most slept on team in the state. And I'd say the last few years, year in and year out, they just continue to do what they do and do it well. Sort of like they did in football, by the way, because they were undefeated in football, did lose that first round playoff game. But they got a couple of football players in the fold for them for hoops. I believe Ty Gordon, one of them as well. So, but over in Class 4, getting back to that, Kings Fork for Ronald, like on a collision course again. I flip flop them 1 and 2 this week. Watch out for EC Glass, who's very, very good. They're going to be a storyline as we move along out of Lynchburg and Western Albemarle under Coach Darren Maynard, who's got a program that's going to be in the fold again. They've been in the state tournament quite a few times here lately.
They
Um,
destroyed they destroyed a good West Potomac team last night. And even though
they
that's a
did.
Class 6 team, that they're defending champs of, I believe, the national district tournament, or one of the districts up in 6C. But anyway,
Yeah, they changed this so much. It's either Gunston or National or Patriot. I forget them all, but they did have
yeah,
a
one of
great
those.
run. David Halston had a nice playoff run a year ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But yeah, they have size. They have size. Western Admiral's got a big man, Josh Simi. They can pound the ball down low. They can play methodical. It's hard to speed them up.
Okay. And Kings Fork, I did notice they had a loss early to a nationally rated, I think Archbishop Ryan, or one of the teams that Hayfield beat.
PA, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like Kings Fork may have a nice team again this year.
They do. Rick Height has been able to reload, not rebuild there. And you remember they had Jaden Epps a couple of years ago. If you put on your TV, you watch games in the Big Ten. Is playing for Illinois now. Had a big moment. I think in that comeback win over Texas a couple weeks ago. He ended up leaving them. Then they had George Beal, who was a player of the year performer now at Norfolk State. Now they got a guard in Sam Brennan you have to watch out for. He's not as big or maybe as athletic as Epps or as quick as Beal and Epps, but he's got the ability to make plays. And they've got some other parts around him that are just really solid. They've got good depth. His son Ryan Height Charles charges every game. Zakai Darden's an athletic jumping jack. He's related to a young man that was a shot blocking machine at Green Run back in the day, Latay Darden. People that follow basketball in Tidewater know that name. So then they're going to be hard to beat for anybody, regardless of classification. They can stack up with the best of the best in the state. Whether we're talking about Hayfield, Menchville, Woodside, Maury, you fill in the blank of those schools. One more Class 6 school I forgot earlier too, but Potomac's had a great run under Anthony Mills, first year head coach. We know they had some tragedy in the offseason with Kyle Honore dying, the son of former head coach Keith Honore. We still send our prayers and condolences to the whole Honore family and everybody at Potomac. But they've been off to a nice start to the year. Alexandria City beat them, and they're another surprise story. There's these surprise stories that are lurking behind your favorites, which we've kind of established, Julian, I think are like your Hayfields, your Patriots, your Battlefields in 6, like your Menchvilles, your Woodsides, your Holland Springs, your Maury's in 5, your Kings Forks, your Veronas in 4s. By the way, maybe the best rivalry in the state. I'm going to make people mad with this. You ready? I think it's Northside and Cave Spring out in
Oh
Class
yeah.
3 in Roanoke. I know you did a great conversation with Billy Pope,
Thank you.
the longtime coach at Northside. They're having their invitational tournament this week, as is Cave Spring. Every time these two play, it's not a down to the wire game, which their first game was not, which will caution last year. Northside beat them pretty handily one matchup. There, you almost see the tone being set for a couple of those classics awaiting And I think they're going to get a couple of classics come playoff time with these two. Cave Spring did not shoot it well in the first matchup, which I watched online on the NFHS network. They do have Dylan Saunders back. Their stretch pick and pop big who's going to Fairleigh Dickinson. Stark Jones and uh, Tinsley are back for them as well on the guard wing perimeter spots. They're not as deep. So I think Northside's got the edge right now because of depth. But if Cave Spring and Jacob Cruz can figure out the rotation and what they want to do in terms of keeping Northside out of transition, they'll have a chance to be back in the state championship conversation again at VCU. And I like Northside's team. He's got two sophomores in Michael Harvey and Cy Hardy, who have stepped up in a big way for them. So they're going to be, I think, contenders for years to come. And Billy Pope is closing in on another milestone, 600 wins in his great career there at Northside. So those two teams look like they're a cut above the rest in Class 3. Although, watch out for Hopewell and Richmond and
Yeah,
Lake
I was
Taylor
gonna
and
say
Todd.
Hopewell and maybe Petersburg will come back later on this season.
I worry about Petersburg if they have enough. They had a couple of players transfer outside of their stud in Chris Fields. Chris Fields is probably the state player here in Class 3. Again, he was at this past year. He's at 6'5", who just rebounds, scores, does a lot of stuff, dirty work on the basket in the paint. He's hard to match up with at the Class 3 level. I think some Division II schools and even some Division Ones need to give him a closer look because he can do a lot of things for them. But um, I don't know if they have enough supporting cast around him, if they hit enough free throws in some of these close games to win them. I watched a little bit of their game that they lost to Hopewell. I'm not going to count them out because they could have a second half run like last year. But the one to really watch out for is Lake Taylor. I watched them last week, Julian, at the Iverson Showcase at Bethel. They just absolutely smothered Bethel defensively. Bethel could not get the ball past half court with its point guard. They bring the pressure. Derek Yogi Edwards has a 6'8" big man in Elijah Moss Washington, who's the football stud, if you recall, from the Gridiron, who is a difference maker in the paint. And there's not a lot of teams in Class 3, not a lot of teams in a lot of divisions to have a 6'8" guy. Plus, they have a guy that's injured who's coming back in Carmelo Baines, who's about 6'7" ish. So they have two big men, very good, crafty young point guard in Aaron Elliott. They have some shooters. They didn't shoot well that night. And then they just beat LC Bird. So they went to Richmond and beat a Class 5 school that's known for its success and pedigree in LC Bird in Richmond. So they're another team that's going to take on all comers. They're Lake Taylor. They don't run from anybody. And I think that if they don't win it this year, they're setting the stage for doing it possibly next year and being in the conversation for a couple of years because they're very sophomore, junior heavy. So watch out for them to make a run and be in the conversation for years to come. And speaking of big men, Abingdon, I know they lost a close game to Auburn last night, who's the defending Class 1 state champs. They got a 7-footer in Evan Ramsey. And if you've been following some of Abingdon's games out west or even Twitter, he's routinely getting like 28 points, 18 rebounds, 7 blocks every night for Abingdon. So it could be fun come tournament time. We've been watching for years. The big men have kind of left high school basketball. We might have some big men back come state tournament time in Class 3 if we get a Lake Taylor or an Abingdon come March.
But it seems like probably at this point, Northside, Cave Spring probably have the nod, or you think the maybe Lake Taylor from the Tidewater could give them.
I do think right now you have to give the nod to Northside and Cave Spring because they've been there before. They have an experience edge over Lake Taylor, but they don't have an athleticism or talent advantage over Lake Taylor. I'm just curious to see if Lake Taylor is ready for that moment yet. Now they're piling up some nice wins and they're getting some credit and they're on their way. And Hopewell's just a couple years removed. Remember, they won the state championship during the COVID year when Elvin Edmonds, the fourth, the son of Coach Elvin Edmonds, was the player of the year now at Bucknell. So they've been there before as well. Cameron Mize, a sophomore guard, who's very streaky and explosive for them. So they can get there. I don't know if they have quite enough size, but they have the guard play and they have the speed and they have the talent. So those two teams I'm watching out for. Tunstall, Rushburg are nice stories right now. Fluvanna's got a player in Bobby Gardner people need to watch out for. There are some teams on the cusp, but I think Northside and Cave Spring have established themselves. And maybe, again, I talked about Battlefield being the quietest team nobody's talked about. How about going into the week Spotswood 8-0? Chet Edwards always has a team that's in the hunt in Class 3. They don't have that big name player like Carmelo Pacheco was a year ago, putting up 25 a game, but they've been knocking on the state championship door for years now. And Spotswood's a team that will not be running or hiding from, say, Northside and Cave Spring in the tournament. So they're a team we might need to pay a little more attention to and could start to go from a contender to one of the favorites as we get closer to March.
I've noticed already, Matthew, that we're talking about a lot of teams from the kind of the Central Virginia, more of the Charlottesville, Piedmont area. You've already mentioned Spotswood. William Monroe had a nice team last year. Yet we talked about Western a little bit. Albemarle made the state tournament last year. I saw St. Anne's Belfield play there a couple weeks ago. they're having a real resurgence of basketball in the Charlottesville area.
Well, we're having that. Another storyline too that I want to hit on is we're seeing a lot of the veteran coaches back in the mix again as having really good teams because I call it the name, image, and likeness era. We don't have that in high school sports. We have it in college sports. With all the transferring going on in intercollegiate athletics, and we see it in high school basketball too. That sometimes if you lose one or two studs, you can be done for years in high school basketball. Tip of the hat to Greg Maynard. I mentioned Darren Maynard at Western Albemarle, who got his 400th win a few years back at Western Albemarle. Greg Maynard at Albemarle picked up his 550th win on the last Tuesday of December 2022. And Albemarle was,
Greg is still, he was coaching when I was at UVA. He's still coaching.
and listen, he's one of the, I put out a tweet the other night, Julian. He's one of the classiest, most respected guys in the state. He's come to our Virginia Preps a couple of times, our classics. He's had that team with Austin Castra and Jay Kahn. They were so close to a state championship. And I'll tell you this right now, to me, he might be the best coach in the state that's not won a state championship. He's that good. They were so close against Bird, lost a double overtime game we called on the NFHS network at Hampton U to that great Bird team. And they had those two terrific bigs. Jake went to Hampton Sydney. Austin was a walk-on that UVA national championship team, if you recall. And he always gets his teams to perform at a high level. You got him coming up on a milestone. Rick Cormany at Radford, who we'll get to, I'm sure, in Class 2, is coming up on the second most wins in VHSL history to match the late, great Bill Littlepage of Hopewell fame. I mentioned Billy Pope at Northside coming up on 600 wins. We got some guys in Tidewater. My co-host on the radio show, Ed Young at Nansemond Rivers, got 7 wins this year. They lost their opener to Kings Fork. He's at 495, so he's coming up on 500 wins.
I didn't know he was still. I didn't know he was still coaching.
Yeah, Ed's at Nansemond. He would be probably at 600 if he didn't spend some time coaching some college ball and doing all the stuff he's done. But so he's coming up on a milestone. We've got all these different veteran coaches that are still, obviously in Tyler, we also got Dwight Robinson at Lansdowne and Craig Brehan, who are over 300, 400 wins. So we've got some coaches that have in those, and even guys that we once looked at as young coaches. Take a Troy Mant at LC Bird. He's going to be coming up on 300, 400 wins soon because these guys have been doing it long enough and their programs are established. So you look around the state and you see it's no different than football. You see the programs that are good because they've had those coaches and they have cultures and they have identities. And that's why they're winning. And I think it's even more prevalent at the lower levels, like the Class 2 and the Class 1, where you've got Radford in the mix always. You've got the usual suspects, whether it's the Brunswicks, the Lancasters, the George Wyths, the Alta Vistas, when they had Mike Cardellaro for years, and now he's the AD at Perry McClure, but he had Perry McClure in the title hunt year after year. So that's the difference sometimes between the ones that are close and the ones that ultimately win the prize.
Okay, well, the Tyrannosaurus Rex in the room that you haven't mentioned yet is John Marshall.
John Marshall, yeah, I was saving them. I was saving the best for last. Yeah, no pun intended.
Yeah, I don't even know we need to talk about Class 2, which is really
my gosh.
I don't. It's really unfortunate the way VHS. I mean, maybe there's no way around it. But for John Marshall to be in Class 2, they've beaten DeMatha on DeMatha's home court. I just wish we can see John Marshall against Hatfield in the state championship, or Patriot or Battlefield, whoever else gets there. But anyway, are we going to talk about Class 2 at all? Or are we going to just ignore it?
I mean, it's the John Marshall Invitational at this point, and I do feel sad in respect, almost not so much for them, but for the others, and to them for them extent, because they play bigger games. They won't maybe always publicly admit this in the regular season. Let's be honest, and this is not to slight Radford, who's got a wonderful program, or take other teams in our top 10 right now, whether it's Floyd County. Love what Brian Harmon does. He's got his Chance Harmon Classic coming up. Shout out to him. Brunswick, James River Buchanan, Strasburg, Gate City, Ridgeview, Virginia High Graham. You can't tell me that those games are harder if they see one of those teams in the state semis or finals than playing DeMatha. I mean, let's just be real here. Nobody can say that with a straight face and not chuckle because they play those teams. And I give you a good one. We had them play Lansdowne a few years back in our Virginia Preps Classic when they were not quite as overpowering as John Marshall is now. And they beat them by double digits. That was the year Lansdowne won the Class 6 state championship, and John Marshall was in Class 2, by the way. And they just played Lansdowne a few weeks ago. I was there in Richmond, beat them by 40. By 40. And Lansdowne's always in the Class 6 hunt. I mean, they're always in our top 10s. Dwight Robinson's been in the state championship a few different times. So they're doing that to a Class 6 school. And we did see a John Marshall Hayfield matchup last year. This John Marshall team is better than last year's John Marshall's team. And that would be the epic battle of epic battles. We got to make that happen, Julian. We got to put this out there and get the meeting of the minds to do some type of, and you know what? I'm sure Carlos Poindexter and Ty White would agree on this because they both have charitable minds. Do it after the season. Do something for charity. I mean, I know Ty White does his coaches for the cure for breast cancer. Do something for a charitable cause. And I know that they can't maybe do it on the VHSL umbrella because there could be some hand slapped and things of that nature. But after the season, if they both win the state championship, do something for charitable donation. And I'm sure it'd be a great cause. People would love it.
But also, Matthew, it's a great idea. It does a real disservice to Radford, a great program. They should have a chance to win a true Class 2 championship. Instead, you're playing a team that is basically an AAU team with lots of great players. They do a great job, and I'm not taking anything away from John Marshall, just that they shouldn't be in Class 2.
Well, and to that point, John Marshall should be allowed the opportunity. If not, and I get the whole point that people argue, their soccer program, their spring sports, their fall sports, their football, their baseball, they're not at that level. So what? For basketball, because they have a different animal, let them play in the highest classification possible. Let them. I don't see what the harm is in that. Who's being harmed by that? Please tell me, because I'd love to know who's being harmed by that. And it would give them a better opportunity to show that they can play at the highest level in classification and go do that. I mean, because that's where they are right now. They have so much star power with Dennis Parker's going to NC State, Damon Red Thompson Jr. is a point guard, by the way, just a junior, 31 points in the Chick-fil-A Classic. No slouch. If he's hitting shots, good luck defending them. They have Dominic Bailey, by the way, who's one of the best glue guys in the state, Julian. This kid draws. I mentioned about Rick Height's son, Ryan Height, drawing charges. I've watched this kid from the Benmore Fall League in the summertime with AAU with Team Loaded to now. This kid draws at least 2 charges every game. He is just the ultimate glue guy in terms of drawing charges and stuff. And then they brought this new kid in from New York, Jason Rivera, who, by the way, check out our interview on him. We put up on YouTube as well. He's been in a documentary, and this kid's maybe on some nights their best player. That's ahead of Parker. Now, I'm not saying every night. Some nights ahead of Parker, Thompson, Bailey, and oh, by the way, Latrell Allman, who's one of the best freshmen or sophomores in the country. I mean, you look at him, you say, there's no way that kid's a class of 25, 26. No, no, no. He's one of the best in the entire country, regardless of, he's going to be spectacular. And he's got a chance, as Ty White likes to say, to put a cap on one day, which means he's got Isaiah Todd in the NBA. He might be one of those guys. So they're just absolutely stacked. Their bench is better than it was back in the fall and the summer. A couple new pieces have helped that situation and equation. I can't see them getting beat unless it's by someone that's a nationally ranked team and Marshall has an off night and that team it's better than B game.
Well, I have to say, Matthew, it's good that they're strong, because you have not talked a lot about Richmond teams so far. I mean, Manchester and James River from Class 6 made the state tournament last year. We haven't mentioned them. We haven't mentioned Glen Allen from Richmond, and Larry Merritt, ball in Virginia. He thinks the Richmond teams are a little bit down this year.
In comparison to some years ago, that could be an accurate assessment. I don't know that it's the strongest crop in the state this year. I think it's up for debate right now. I think ordinarily you always start in Richmond or Tidewater. I might give the nod, believe it or not, to Northern Virginia just because of its depth of teams.
Yeah.
Certainly, when you have Hatfield as your flag carrier on a 39-game winning streak, that doesn't hurt. And then you look at the private school sector where you've got Paul the Sixth, WCAC, and what they're doing with Darren Harris, getting rave reviews from his latest shooting exhibition, where he's considered by many to be the best shooter in the entire country, and he's going to Duke. And they have 10 Division I players, and Glenn Ferrello's built just a wealth of talent and tremendous pieces there with what they have at PVI. And then you have other private schools like O'Connell and Bishop Ireton and Flint Hill, and the list goes on and on of schools up there. And you can name about 20 to 25 schools in Nova encompassing more than one division, Class 6 down to Class 4. Even take your Loudoun counties and Loudoun valleys and Tuscarora, who's been a school on the rise in Class 4, like what they're doing. They're one of those programs trending upward. They've been known for success in girls, now making some noise in boys. I think Nova might have the most you could say quantity and quality, certainly quantity right now, and the debate is up for grabs as far as quality too. They can stack up with Tywood or Richmond this year, which they might not always on a yearly basis.
Yeah. Well, let's go to Class 1. Last year, Auburn and Washington Lee from Northern Neck were in the Class 1 final. You mentioned that Auburn has beaten Abingdon this year, so Auburn looks like they're on pace for another a repeat.
Well, maybe they did lose Ethan Milirons, the star of the coach Terry Milirons. They do have his other son back, Nick, and they brought back pretty much all the other holdovers from that team. I think their path is going to be hard because watch out for this George Wythe team. They've got a lot of young talent, freshmen and sophomores that were on their teams the last couple of years that have returned. Reed Kurtner, Ty Coleman, bunch of pieces that can fill it up, and they score, played a good pace, like what Tony Dunford's done there. And a lot of coaches I spoke to before the season, they were highlighting them as one to watch out for. They can play at such a good pace that I think when the dust settles, they're the one that probably comes out of 1C. Watch out in 1D though. Twin Springs has got two just really dynamic scorers. I know they lost their first couple of games to Twin Springs, but they've got two young men, Julian, that can score 30 plus on any given night. And Connor Lane and Bradley Owens, they are two lethal scorers. So out of 1D, they might be the one that comes out of there. And then in 1A, Lancaster with the Henderson brothers, they really played a good pace. So I think the Class 1 tournament shaping up to be a good one, particularly if we get those three to come to the forefront. And watch out for Franklin. Robbie Cutchins has got a team. Siobhan Torrance, this young man's getting about 11, 12 rebounds a game. They've sort of come out of nowhere at 7-0. I'm curious to see if they can be there come tournament time, still with those Lancasters and the Alta Vistas and those teams, because their schedule's going to get a little tougher. They play Nance, whenever I mentioned a Class 5 school, Ed Young's team, who's 7-1, coming up on January 7th in the Western Branch Classic. So that's a great barometer. If you're a Class 1 school, you're playing up against Class 5. That's going to be a real tough test for you. Northampton had that same test against Nance, but lost it. Class 1 school who's got a big 6'8" guy in Braden Justice inside. So there's some teams in Class 1. Narrows, Collier Pruitt, watch out for him. He's a 1,000-point level scorer. He's one that can fill it up. I think, though, Lancaster and George Wythe have the most firepower. If you're looking at teams that can go score in the 70s or 80s and really put the pedal to the metal, those two sort of stand out to me. To beat them, someone's going to have to control tempo. Now, I will give you a team that's a dark horse. Their record's not glossy right now, and they got one of the better coaches around. If there's someone that could maybe upset the apple cart and keep one of those teams from getting there, I'm not sure his team's good enough to win it, is Eastside. Patrick Dameron, he's one of the best at controlling tempo. So there's a couple teams out there that can keep one of these teams from winning it. Not sure they'll ultimately take the prize. Lancaster and George Wythe are the favorites to me, not counting out Auburn. I think they're still going to be in the mix. And a sleeper for you is Lebanon. Their team is starting to pick up some steam, scoring at a good rate. They're one that we're not talking a whole lot about right now. Maybe as we get closer to February, they'll pick up more steam and become one of those teams that's contending for the title. So there's some teams up there in Class 1. I'd be surprised if you gave me Lancaster, George Wythe, the field. I'll take that combo of Lancaster, George Wythe at the moment.
Yeah, it's amazing. Twin Springs, Lebanon, those Appalachian schools, especially Twin Springs, they have produced so many great players, pound for pound. Probably have had more great players than almost any school in the state. Well, let's go to the girls preview now. And this year, Class 6 is wide open. And it's funny. I'm going to throw in it before you go. I'm going to throw a name out.
Sure.
My own high school, Robinson, is probably in the mix here.
It's funny you say that. I've heard some good things about them. And Class 6, I think a lot of people wonder, Julian, after what Madison's done, can they keep that going? And it's a very, very hard thing to do. But Robinson's been kind of knocking on the door, and I like what they're building there. Class 6 has got, I think the power is definitely up north. We had that run where Cosby, when Rachel Mead was there, they were winning the championships. They had Dorothy Adamico and Jocelyn Jones, and some of those players that were always, high level Division I getting attention. And Tidewater had a couple teams on the peripheral with Lancetown and Western Branch. The power shifted back to north. We've had the years where Freddie Priester's at Oakton's been there, West Springfield, Coach Gibson's been there. It's back up to the north. Whether it's Madison or now Robinson, you feel like it's going to come out of there. And then Edison, I didn't get a chance to. I'm obviously in Boone, North Carolina, as we speak right now, as our ladies of ODU get ready to play Appalachian State. But my co-host on the radio, Ed Young, was at the Boo Williams event, and he was actually at the Hampton Edison game, and he was very impressed with Edison's point guard. Was raving to me about her quickness and just their ability up the bounce. And they battled back from down about 10, 12 points. So Diane Lewis has them competing again at a high level against a Hampton team that brings a lot of pressure, has a known player in Kennedy Harris who's going to George Mason. So that's what you love this time of year, is you get some more of that mingling, that mixing of matchups where you get a Class 6 versus a Class 4. And Hampton's not your typical Class 4. You get a Kings Fork, or you get a team from, you get the Woodgroves or Loudoun Valleys of the world, the Loudoun counties, to play someone maybe out of Richmond or Tidewater. You get different styles this time of year. So to me, that marquee player is going to determine it. who's that hot player come tournament time, but also whose style of play can sort of dictate how a game goes. I think for years, different division here, like Class 2, Robin Dotson's one of the legends in the sport, and his team's always, either winning the state championship or playing for it. They have a style and a system where they can control tempo so well and set the tone that even if they get down like 8, 10, 12 points, they did a year ago in the Class 2 finals, they find a way to get back because they don't deviate from the script. So that's going to be the thing here. As Robinson gets on that journey here, and perhaps an Edison gets back in a conversation, somebody else, who's going to be able to stick to the script the best and not deviate from it, whether you have the marquee player or you're going against a team that does have that difference making player, because there's going to be one or two of those every year. We see them all the time. Think back to VCU a few years ago. Megan Walker put on a show, and then we're watching her, get drafted in the WNBA from Monacan and goes to UConn, and there's going to be two or three of those players that come March will mesmerize us.
Yeah. Well, one, I think at the beginning of the season up here, it was pretty much accepted that Osborne Park would be the power in Northern Virginia, but they lost their opening district game to Patriot. I believe they lost another game to a more of a nationally known team. I can't think of it. I can't pull the name right now. So Chrissy Kelly's team, I know they were young last year, but it looks like it's not a done deal. They're going to have some competition even in their own region.
Yeah, I'm probably going through some growing pains here early on. I haven't paid a close amount of attention to see how they've done to this point, but I'm not counting her out. She's got state playoff pedigree and history of performing at a high level. So I think they'll be right there come tournament time. I don't count them out by any means. And, the big thing for them is going to be a matter of, I think, if they can defend at a very, very high level, because when you get to that point of being close, is that hunger still going to be there to go get over that hump? And then there's some teams that say, hold on a second, you're the favorite now. We took more of a step this offseason. We want to prove it to you. So Class 6 looks like it's the best in girls right now. That's not to say that I wouldn't be really fascinated by what plays out in Class 5, particularly in Richmond and Tidewater. I think Tidewater, you look at the dynasty that Princess Anne is under Darnell Dozier, always, they got more, I think, rings than you have fingers. He can open up a jewelry shop, as we like to joke. Minchville with Amari Smith, who's going to Morgan State. Very, very good. They put on a show and a dazzling display in the state finals last year against the Woodgrove team, who was certainly undermanned, missing one of their better players. But in Class 4, Kings Fork feels like they're as good as they've been, if not better, with Soraya Griffin leading the way for them. But I think Class 6, you could take 5 or 6 of those teams, whether you're picking from Osborne Park or Robinson or Madison or Edison, pick out, put them in a hat and take out 5 or 6 of those teams, and they'd all have a great chance to compete for 5 and 4. Outside of maybe those top 2 in Class 5 and Class 4, I'm not sure you could take them and put them in 6 and say, okay, go do the same. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah. And I do understand that, as you said, you mentioned Minchville, the defending state champ. I think their only losses in a Christmas tournament in Maryland. So
they lost last night. Actually, I take that back. I think they lost last night. They were up. Someone texted me. I haven't confirmed this. I think they were up and they lost like 2 in that Boo Williams event. I think they lost the second.
Okay, so they lost. Okay, that's the second one. Okay.
Yeah.
So then, so we talked about Class 4 a little bit. It was last year was Kings Fork and Millbrook. Now let's go to Class 3. Maybe one of the best teams in the state last year was Carroll County. They put up a whole lot of points. I know they've only lost one game. They lost a game in the Christmas tournament in Georgia. So they look like they're probably going to be tough again this year.
Yeah, I would say it's going to be hard to keep them from getting back. Class 3, though, year after year, you look at it, and Spotswood is always in the hunt. And I wouldn't count them out. We mentioned them on the boys' side, and Coach Dodson's had a team that has been very, very good. I look at just last year, in fact, they were in the regional finals, won the overtime game over Fort Defiance, and then they got to the states, beat Stanton River, lost to Carroll County big. Their record wasn't all that glossy at 18-8. I'm not counting them out. Lakeland out of Tidewater plays some teams that are higher divisions, so their Class 3 Southeastern districts got a lot of Class 6, Class 5 schools. I don't know if they're going to have enough firepower when they went into Meridian last year and ran into a buzzsaw. Meridian used to be George Mason, has always had a really good girls program. So I think you have to start with Carroll County. I'm just curious to see if we get that rematch with Spotswood come playoff time. Don't pay attention to Spotswood's record. They've got a history. Go look them up of championships. That's the one program I always say, don't count them out. They could be one that could be that fly in the ointment, so to speak.
And you just mentioned this. I think you always have to be careful with divisions with lots of different classifications within the same division. Like you mentioned earlier today that Riverhead's lost a game today. Well, it wasn't lost a game this year. Well, it wasn't to a team in their classification. And I think it happens even more in basketball. You're gonna have teams that lose because they're playing their class 3 team playing against class 6. And that's going to cause some matchup problems.
Well, that's an excellent point because it also makes it harder for us to do rankings because I will literally, when I'm putting these rankings together each week, which are all, subjective and opinion driven, you say, all right, this team is 4-2, this team is 8-0, but in your heart of hearts, the 4-2 team's better because they've played a tougher schedule. They lost to 2 teams that if that 8-0 team played, they're not beating them either.
Yeah.
So what do you do in that sense? Then again, it's the old Bill Parcells. You are what your record says you are. You haven't lost. So sometimes you don't know how good or bad an undefeated team is because they haven't been knocked off that pedestal, particularly as that goes from 6-0, 7-0, 8-0 to like a team that's 17-0, 18-0, 19-0. When you get on that type of streak, then you start to believe you can't lose. It's almost winning those close one-score games. I mean, nobody believes right now, not to switch total subjects to you, Julio, the NFL, the Minnesota Vikings, but they keep winning these one-score games. They ride from 33 down against the Colts. They beat the Bills in the craziest, flukiest of ways. Yet the odds makers, the people in the know, have them as underdogs against the Packers and the Lions in their own division. So they'll figure, but come playoff time, they have this belief in these tight situations because they've been there before. And I think that's applicable to the playoffs for girls and boys basketball because if you've been in so many tight games and pressure cookers, you know how to react in those situations. So as I'm bringing up the spots, but on girls, I don't worry about the record. They've been there before. Their coach has, their girls have, those programs know how to operate and function in those situations. Carroll County's won a championship, so I'm not taking anything from them. But if that one team gets in that spot, I'm not going to doubt them or say they have no chance.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's great advice. So, well, let's go quickly to class 2 and class 1. Class 2, last year the final was Central Wise versus Luray. Class 1, the final was Honaker versus Buffalo Gap. What do you see in those two classifications?
It's the Robin Dotson Invitational. Now, I say that and I think Luray had its run. I don't know if they're totally out of it. They've been right there and it's been superb to watch the last few years and call some of those championship games. But Central Dotson to me is going to be hard to beat, Julian, from the standpoint of I look at them and just literally this past year, Coach Dotson's, dare I say, best player, one of his best players, was Emma McCamus, who was All-State as a freshman, 22 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists a game. She scored almost 700 points as a freshman. So she came back. Abby Jordan came back, who was 6 points a game as a freshman. And then they brought in a transfer from Grundy and Madison Looney, who there put up a double-double of 17 points, 16 rebounds. So they got better. I don't think they got any worse. And they had to rally to win that state championship game. Now, there's some good programs in Class 2. I mean, it's not going to be a cupcake walk for them. I think it's a little different than John Marshall for boys in Class 2 because you have to look at what Gate City does, and they've got a recent championship in their history. Luray does. There's some programs that could give them a battle. But if Central Wise does what it's supposed to, I fully anticipate them being back there. They're the team to beat. It's going to take someone bringing their A game to beat them, and probably Central Wise not being on its A game to lose.
Yeah. And class 1 with Honaker and Buffalo Gap, any insight into class 1?
I think that one's a little bit more wide open. Honaker has built a nice program. I don't foresee that being easy to go through because, again, I look at how they got there last year, 27-3. They did have an injury, and that game was deceiving. I call that game. That score was 63-29. And that game was, was fairly manageable in the first half. They will get some tests. I do think they're probably the one you circle at the moment. I don't think I was going to say this on the boys' side. I think that's very true on the girls' side too. I think the power's out west in Class 1 and Class 2. I'm not sure why that is. I have to do a little bit of a deeper dive and a study, but I feel like outside of a school here or there, and I'm not saying a team can't win it from Class 1 or Class 2 on the eastern side of the state, but take out, say, John Marshall boys, take out, say, Lancaster boys. it feels like most of our teams, the better records and higher ranked teams, are on the western side of the state. And I'm not sure why there's that divide at the moment. It feels like it's true though in both boys and girls basketball. And it's almost bleeding over to football to an extent.
Mm.
You really haven't seen some of these teams on the eastern side of the state and the smaller divisions win it. And again, that's if you take out the elephant in the room that is John Marshall for boys because they're Richmond. But you see a lot of those teams from the western side, and I don't know if it's more, their athletes they're having a better turnout, youth programs. I'm not sure what the exact reason for that is, but I feel like you don't see many teams on the east side that you fully believe in. That if you get that matchup, pick out whatever district it is, you get to the final, it's an east versus a west team. Feels like 60-70% of the time we're going to favor or lean with the western team for whatever that reason is. Maybe some more coaching stability plays into that count too. There hasn't been as much coaching turnover. That sometimes can be a factor. But that just feels like that's been the case. Has it felt that way to you too? Because it's felt that way to me for a while here.
Well, sometimes that could be a cultural thing, and that they just those communities are valuing their youth sports more, and they're putting more time into it. And for example, in basketball, Appalachian teams have always done well in basketball because they have leagues at a very young age, and they really love it. Some of the communities have great wrestling programs for the exact same reason. So it could
Especially
be
Grundy, you're right. Yeah.
it could
Grundy
be a
for sure. Yeah.
So Matthew, one thing I wanted to do before we get to some matchups to look for, did we miss any prospects, female, male, on either side that we didn't mention because their teams aren't very good? Are there any of these great players that maybe we didn't talk about because they're not on top teams?
Oh, that's a great question. As far as prospects go, no, I wouldn't say there's anybody that's been overshadowing. I do want to shout. I mentioned one. I didn't talk about Princess Anne, how good they were on girls' side. Zakiya Stevenson's going to Ole Miss. She's superb to watch in the open court. I want to make sure I shout her out. There really hasn't been. It's weird, Julian. There's been a couple of girls on the couple of players on the girls' side that have transferred out to go to, like, for example, Louisa had a girl in Olivia McGee who was a big time player, and she went to IMG Academy, and
Uh,
now she is signed with UVA. So
oh,
there's been
really?
some players that have actually, yeah, there's been some players that have actually left to go to some power and prep programs. It's not been I would say a huge chunk of players, but that's one that leaps to mind on the girls' side. In addition to I mentioned Stevenson, I mentioned a couple from some teams that are standing out. On the boys' side, we touched on Saunders, who's going to Fairleigh Dickinson. Um, in the Class 6, we know about Greg Jones, obviously going to American from Hayfield. This was not a really strong crop of Division One, bevy of talent players. It's sort of a lower tier class. We know obviously in 2024 there, Darren Harris at PBI is going to Duke. But some of your better players have left the Commonwealth, or they might be at a private school program, be it in the Commonwealth or outside. I mentioned those two guys. Oh, I do want to shout out from Woodside. Trevor Smith is going to Richmond. So he's one to keep an eye out for. He headed to the Spiders. So yeah, and I think too, with that, a lot more of the high school players on the basketball side, we're seeing it start to bleed into football a little bit because of all the transferring. We're seeing some of the seniors have to wait around a little bit for their decisions because college coaches are taking players from other schools, are getting that fifth year guy, that grad transfer to come in as opposed to getting the high school senior, particularly if it's a senior that's on a fringe. If you're not a ranked player, a 3-star level guy or 3-star level girl, they're just turning the page. And it's unfortunate, but that's where we are in college sports and with high school basketball, involved with it too.
Yeah, even a tremendous player like Margod from Fairfax, he's got some Division II offers, and I'm still waiting for him to get a Division I offer because he's a tremendous player. Let's talk about some games to look forward to. I'm gonna throw two out there right now. I believe January 7th is Hayfield versus Jackson Reed. Now, Jackson Reed won the it's a former Wilson High School in DC. They lost in overtime, I believe, to Sidwell Friends last year in the city championship. Maybe that was in regulation, but it was a 1 point last second shot. That's going to be a great game. That's a true test for Hayfield. Once Hayfield gets into their district play, they're going to have a hard time staying 100% sharp because they're going to win every game by 30 points. And then Battlefield and Patriot is, I believe, January 13th. And Patriots lost 2 games. They lost the game in a Christmas tournament the other day. I saw the Hatfield game. That game could have gone either way. Patriots tremendous. They destroyed Western Branch. They beat Highland Springs very easily. Two teams that are classics, great programs. Patriots going to be sharp. So those are the two games that I'm excited about seeing.
Yeah, I mean, you can't go wrong with those. And I watched this as we were stopping in to get some food at lunch. I watched on the phone. They had, I think, on the Delmarva network, the Hayfield game. Watched it on my phone a little bit yesterday, and really impressed how they got their composure down 11. You know, they found David King, their guards, Holloway, Bass Briscoe, John Awoke. They got revved up and they made plays. And they're going to be hard to beat. Hayfield's just, they have so many, they're deeper than last year. They're
Yeah.
deeper than even the freshman Phoenix Card is a player that people are going to know about by the end of the year.
Yeah.
And Patriot, I don't worry about them. They're going to be just fine. The Patriot Battlefield game is going to be a hellacious battle. I think Battlefield's got a chip on its shoulder, as it should, because we don't talk enough about them. And I'm partially to blame for that. I'll be the first to admit that. Other games to watch out for. I'm curious to see on a smaller level, Lancaster, Northampton, how they do against a team with a big man, Lancaster, because they've been scoring at will on people. Um, in Class 3, if we get another matchup come playoff time, or Northside Cave Spring is definitely one to circle. Uh, I don't know that Spotswood's going to get a real test in its Valley District. Be curious to see if that happens or when it happens. Kings Fork playing Oscar Smith in mid-January. I think it's like on the 17th. That'll be a good game because Oscar Smith has a chance to be undefeated, and Kings Fork shouldn't have a loss to a team from Virginia. Their losses will be to out-of-state opponents. So that'll be a packed house out there in Suffolk when those two collide. In Class 5, you can almost just pick a matchup on any given night, the Patrick Henry, Roanoke, William Fleming. We didn't talk enough about them probably. They played a barn burner the first go round, and those games are always wars with Mickey Hardy's Colonels at Fleming and Jack Esworthy's Patriots at Patrick Henry, Roanoke. Abu Yarma at Patrick Henry, Roanoke is a player to watch out for. He's really, really got some skills to him, and I could see him being a bigger factor in the rematch that Fleming won the first game on a game winner at the end. So those matchups are always ones to circle when those two hook up. They've been longtime rivals. Once when they were in district in the Western Valley years ago, and now they're not, in the same district. But those are always great.
Patrick Henry and Fleming aren't the same. Patrick Henry and Fleming aren't the same.
No, one is in the River Ridge, one's in the Blue Ridge district, unless they've changed it in the last 24 hours, much like you said with the Gunston and
crosstown
Potomac.
rivals. That's crazy.
Julian, they change these districts. Well, they don't do it in all parts of the state, but some of these districts they change all the time, and it's just hard to get a handle on it. Yeah, so the Blue Ridge district is Franklin County, Lord Botetourt, Northside, Stanton River, William Byrd, William Fleming, and that's the Blue Ridge district. The River Ridge district is Blacksburg, Cave Spring, Christiansburg, Hidden Valley, Pulaski County, Patrick Henry, Roanoke, and Salem of Salem. And by the way, Cave Spring will then hook up with Patrick Henry, Roanoke at some point as well. So that's another one of those Class 3 defending state champs against a Class 5 team that's trying to prove its worth as a Class 5 contender. So I think people look at that and they'll say, well, Patrick Henry, Roanoke, they're getting all these wins against teams. Are they worthy of playing the gauntlet that the teams in Tidewater, like Menchville and Woodside and Norview and Maury from the Peninsula and Eastern District see? And it's like, well, you play Cave Spring, you play Northside, you play William Fleming. It's not too shabby. So that always makes me chuckle when people will provide their input on the rankings and say, well, they're 18-2. They don't belong here because they haven't played who, Highland Springs of Orion and LC Bird have played, or Norview, Maury, and Menchville and Woodside have played. It's like, well, do your research, do your homework, and then maybe you can come back with that argument. It was the same thing we heard all year with freedom in football. And I'm sure you probably brought this up to Daryl Overton was, did they play anybody? It's like, hello, they just beat Stonebridge. That's somebody pretty good, in case you haven't heard.
When you score as many points as they do, it's hard to figure out who you're playing, whether they're really good.
Coach, I know you're 14-0 and you set a record for points in the state, but have you beaten anybody?
Exactly. Yeah.
What we're going to today, because we're going to win state championship, you can keep asking us question next year. When we played DeMatha in September, we played something, then you can ask us the question again. That's fine. We'll keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah. As you know, I love those old school rivalries like Patrick Henry and Fleming. Fleming was in the black section of Roanoke. Always had incredible basketball teams, great talent. And Patrick Henry over time has gotten more and more diverse. But one thing is for sure, it's always been a great rivalry. It goes back many years. So many great players for those two schools.
It's funny you said because Julian, we should do this before we run here, and maybe we'll do up a poll or a Facebook post or a social media post. Let some fans interact on us because they love to do this. We put this up on Virginia Preps on our message boards too. Is what is or give us your top 5 rivalries in the state for
Yeah.
basketball because I think it's in my years of covering it for almost 20 years. It's interchanged for years. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, it goes in ebbs and flows and cycles, but there's nothing when you walk into a gym, you pick up whatever part of the state you're from. If you're in Lynchburg or you're in Roanoke or Fredericksburg or Tidewater, Richmond, Northern Virginia, whatever part of the state, Southwest Virginia, you're one that gets, you know, you love the matchups in Big Stone Gap or Radford, wherever you're from. I can just tell you for years, there's nothing like the goosebumps and electricity when I walk into a Booker T. Norcom game or
Mm.
a Hampton Bethel game or a Nansman Kings Fort game. Just those gyms are packed. I've had to call coaches to let me in the back door, and this is like 2 hours before the game starts. You know this goes, and there's just those games have a different feel to them.
Yeah.
And
There's
right now, I don't know that there's one that's above the. I mentioned Northside Cave Spring earlier, so I'm sure people will provide their feedback or tell me why I'm wrong or why I'm right. But I'm curious to see what people think is the best rivalry in the state and which has withstood the test of time. Because as you know, when coaches change or you have a different, you know, teams go up and down, it's hard to sustain those rivalries. But there's some that have withstood the test of time.
Yeah, it's interesting. We did a poll just for Northern Virginia, and the
Mm.
one that won was TC Woodson, and now it's
Oh,
Alexandria City, but that hasn't been a
yeah,
rivalry in many, many, many years. But
right.
historically, it was a huge rivalry. Tommy Amaker, Tyrone
Yeah.
Shaw, so many TC Williams players can't even.
The
And
Red
then
Jenkins days, yep. Yeah.
Virginia, that's a huge rivalry. And then probably one that would win historically up here would be Woodbridge Potomac, but then Woodbridge Garfield, and then Garfield Potomac. I mean, those are because back then there was only 3 or 4 schools in that part of Prince William County. So you're going to have your old school rivalries, like you mentioned, Norcom and Booker T, or I'm sure like Bayside and Kempsville, or
Maury
Greenland,
Granby. Yeah.
or
Maury
Granby, yeah.
Granby. Yeah. Yeah. What's funny
Grant,
is because about Woodbridge, because if you spoke with, and I think Courtney Kofer's done a nice job there, and Woodbridge has been, you know, prevalent. If you spoke with former Potomac coach Keith Honoré and former Freedom coach James West a couple years ago, the game people always circled was that Freedom Potomac game. That was a game that had a lot of spice and buzz to it, even though Potomac owned the series for so many years. But it's funny because the players may have a different view on it than the fans and the coaches, and vice versa. And it does go in some ebbs and flows because there's those city rivalries, those district rivalries. I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways you can go with it. Woodside Menchville's a big one right now in the peninsula here in Tidewater, but Hampton Bethel's got like years and years and years. You go back to the Iverson era, the Curry era. I mean,
and
it's
football too.
yes, yes. That's where it transcends it. When you can go to multiple sports, it's
Yeah.
hard to beat those. And then people say, hold on a second, Hampton Phoebus. Hampton Phoebus is a monster deal. So there's you can go so many different directions with that. Albemarle, Western Albemarle. I know it might not. So if you say that to people in different parts of the state, they might not know where their schools are or anything about them. But people will live and breathe those rivalries, and that's what keeps a lot of the pageantry and tradition and passion alive for high school sports, despite some of the changes we've gone through with the reclassifications and realignments and so forth. But people look forward to those games, and I'm still glad we have a lot of those games to look forward to and circle on the calendar when they do happen.
Yeah, it's a danger when the VHSL, when they make changes that threaten the brand of the basketball. Like when they made 6 classifications, and you took John Marshall out of the traditional district they're in Richmond.
Sure.
All those rivalries, it happened at the beach course. But it does threaten the rivalries, and the rivalries it's what keeps the fans involved. It keeps the neutrals involved. As
It
long as
is.
as long as the team is good, you're always going to have support from the fans at that school. But if you want neutrals to love your sport, it is important to maintain the rivalries.
Well, not to be the guy that goes to be the defender of the universe for the VHSL here, because sometimes I am a little, give my opinion and critique here. I will defend them in this point. I think it was well intended what they tried to do with this to make it equal and equitable from a classification standpoint of enrollment. Where it got murky was okay, Phoebus and Hampton are longtime rivals, but now 1s and 4, 1s and 3, so you won't get that matchup in the playoffs. And you can go through all the list of not just those two. I'm just using it as an example
So
for this
many. There's so
purposes.
many.
Yeah, so many. I mean, there's a list of 100 of them.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it's people say it's the VHL's fault, and you got to remember this is left up to subcommittees and a lot of administrators and ADs. So we pin the blame on the VHSL when a lot of times you can't get certain parts of the state to agree on things. If the western parts of the state, for an example, and I got this from I can't say which source. I was initially told before our basketball season, Julian, we would build a cross bracket for the state tournament this year, which I was looking forward to. Like maybe the two best teams in the state are Hatfield and pick a same side.
Battlefield Patriot like last year. They would have been
There
separated.
you go. Let's say they're two best teams in the state. Let's say they're two best teams. Now they're not cross bracketing. And the word I got was the western part of the state was against that. Now I haven't confirmed that, but that's what I got through the grapevine. Marvin Gaye saying it. No, I heard through the grapevine that that was the case. But you look at it from both sides. The western part wants to be represented. Are they right about that? Well, if you're in the west part of the state, you want to be represented. But so you got to get, it's just like when we have in politics, Republicans, Democrats, you got to get both sides to agree on something. And that's what's kept us from this power struggle, the North, the South, the East, the West, to agree on something, which I think, honestly, if the two best teams in the state, I don't care if they're from Battlefield Patriots side or other side of the state, they could be from the western side of the state. I want the two best teams in the championship game. I don't care where they're from and who they are. I want the best matchup because it does take a little bit of air out of the building when you have a 40-point final and that state semifinal game is the double overtime classic. You want that in the final.
That's a problem. That's when you need leadership, because what happens is if you allow interest to make these kind of decisions, everyone's going to act what's in the best interest of their region or their school. You need leadership that could come in and say, look, we need to do this for the best interests of Virginia and Virginia sports. Until you have that kind of movement, you're always going to have these decisions that are not made in the best interest of preserving the VHSL brand. And that's the problem.
Basketball song.
Yeah. As a longtime fan of the game, they've done a lot of damage to the sport. So I got to be careful though, because I might get back into officiating and they're not going to let me officiate if I keep slamming the VHSL. Matthew, this has been great. I appreciate you, all the things you do for high school sports, covering the sport, not just basketball and football, but all sports. Matthew can be found on virginiapreps.com, great message boards, great articles, video, pictures. They do an amazing job for many, many years. ESPN Radio 94.1. You can get that online, 10 o'clock to noon on Saturdays with Coach Ed Young. Also, he's got a great YouTube channel. On Twitter, he's Hatfield Sports. Matthew, as always, I really appreciate you doing this.
Hey, thank you, Julian. It was a blast. I look forward to chat with you again in 2023. Hard to believe the year's already about done.
Yeah, this time we're gonna go back and see how your picks did and give you a chance for redemption in the postseason.
Hey, always a pleasure. Have a good one.
Okay, Matt. Appreciate it again, buddy. Take care, man.